Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Dolan, and I'm a member of the class of 1978. You can't hear me. Oh, I'm sorry. We're learning how to do this. We're getting the act together. It's great to see you all here today. It's my pleasure to welcome you and to introduce the session, Impact Investing, Aligning Capital with Values. If that's not what you think you should be in, now is your time to leave. But I wouldn't do that if I was you. I'm delighted to introduce Bruce Usher. Bruce is the co-director of the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise, Elizabeth Strickler, 86, and Mark T. Galilee, 86, faculty director, and a professor of professional practice. Before joining Columbia, Bruce was the CEO of Echo Securities Group, PLC, which developed greenhouse gas emission reduction projects in developing countries. A lot of information is in the one-pager that I think you received when you walked in. It is not only Bruce's bio, but all of the bios for our wonderful speakers today. At Columbia, Bruce teaches courses about the intersection of finance, social, and environmental issues. This area, as many of you know, is a pretty major area for both companies and not-for-profits because many people are dedicated to environmental, social, and government principles, better known as ESG principles. I am honored to introduce Bruce to you as a moderator in this session. Columbia Business School, I'm going to say something here before I'm going to have to say this. But I will say that I have a different background. I was a social worker before I came to Columbia, and then I changed my profession, and I'm in investments. And Columbia just did a lot for me professionally and personally as I developed skills to co-found 2 asset management firms and to provide interesting careers, which is really something very special today in the world that I don't know if that is done as much as it used to be done when many of us graduated, particularly those in the class of 78, where a firm is really spends time and money developing people's careers. Most important was our ability to be in a hiring mode during the recession that followed 2008. Many of you in the finance business know that what had happened to the financial industry after 2008. Now I'm going to stop talking and let Bruce take the floor.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. I'm always amazed at the reunion how many people show up early in the morning on a Saturday. So welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. And really important welcome to our 3 panelists I'm going to introduce shortly. So our plan for the hour is I'm going to just spend 5 or 10 minutes giving an overview of what is impact investing. I think there's a lot of different ways of looking at this new and emerging sector. And then ask our panelists each take about 5 minutes to talk about their work and their perspective on this area. And then I have a few questions for our panelists to dig into a few issues a bit, and then I open up to questions from all of you, and really look forward to your questions. The one thing I know about the alumni reunions, my experience doing this every year for a while, is alumni don't hold back when they ask questions. You're not getting graded, you can say whatever you want. So don't hold back, but please, lots of questions, not too many comments, and we'll have a great discussion. So I want to give you a little overview. What do we mean when we talk about impact investing? And it begins with this survey, which was done a couple of years ago. It was reported in HBR. And obviously what we can see here is that millennials, which are individuals roughly aged 18 to 38 today, really care about their social, political, and environmental values, which is nice. And really the next question is, so what? That they care about these things. And the so what is that that generation, the millennial generation, is about to enjoy the largest intergenerational wealth transfer ever. Estimates are that over $40 trillion is going to be inherited. Coming mostly from my generation, I'm the tail end of baby boomers. Many of you in this room are in the baby boomer generation. And in that intergenerational wealth transfer, the younger generation, millennials, are caring about these issues. And impact investing is really about how they put that sentiment into practice. A definition, there are several definitions out there today. I think this one sums it up the best. It's investments made with the intention, the key word in this sense is intention, to generate environmental or social benefits or returns, in addition to financial return. So to understand the definition, you actually need to step back a little bit into history. And if we step back a bit, we start with this individual. Historically speaking, if we go back prior to 1900, and we think about charity or philanthropy, it was very limited. If an individual was fortunate enough to generate wealth, they inevitably pass that wealth on to their family, and some of that wealth generally went to the religious institution, to their church or other institution. That was the extent of philanthropy by and large. And ironically, the great robber barons of the late 19th century were the first to actually change that dynamic. And this individual, Andrew Carnegie, he wrote this book in 1889 called The Gospel of Wealth. It's a very small book. It's actually not a very well-written book, but it's a very important book because in it he wrote, I quote, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." And Carnegie actually gave away 90% of his wealth before he died. So he was perhaps the first great philanthropist of the modern era. And after Carnegie comes Rockefeller, who gave away a great deal of his fortune, and other wealthy men. At that time was pretty much all men. And so we developed around 1900 what I call a traditional perspective on wealth and philanthropy, which is you generate it, you create it, and then if you're so inclined, you give some or perhaps all of it away. And these two worlds are very separated. On the generation side, you're always trying to maximize the risk-adjusted returns. And on the philanthropy side, you just give it away. You don't think about return. It's irrelevant. And that held sway for about 100 years, this model. 1900 to 2000 roughly. 2007, the Rockefeller Foundation, a number of other individuals came together and coined this term, impact investing, and that definition you saw. And since then, impact investing has really developed into a whole spectrum of investment activities. And this is a kind of complex slide. Just spend a minute or two on it, and then we'll wrap up and get to our panels. There are roughly 4 buckets of impact investing today. And I say roughly because there's some argument about these definitions. The first, and you're probably familiar with this, is what we call responsible investing, or sometimes called socially responsible investing, or SRI. And this is when investors refuse to invest in certain companies or stocks because they consider them bad. The classic bad companies historically have been tobacco companies. People don't want to invest in tobacco companies, sometimes arms companies. The most recent one in the responsible category is handgun manufacturers or gun manufacturers that investors prefer not to invest in. If you hold mutual funds, there's a very, very high probability that some of those funds, the majority of those funds, practice responsible investing. If you have, and I hope all of you have contributed to Columbia's endowment. Columbia's endowment practices responsible investing, as does every other endowment at every school today. Moving on the spectrum, just quickly along, sustainable investing is not about avoiding bad companies, but actually looking for good companies and incorporating what we call ESG metrics, environmental, social, governance metrics, into your investment decisions. So when you're looking at a portfolio of stocks, which stocks rank highly on those metrics, and incorporate that decision making. It's not the only decision. In fact, the financial metrics are probably still dominant, but this affects the way you think about how you invest. And companies that do well in the ESG metrics, you're more likely to invest in, partly because they may perform better. The third category is thematic investing. These are investors who have a particular issue that they care about, and they're looking for companies to invest in to support that issue. Outside my work here as a faculty member at Columbia, I'm also actually an impact investor, a thematic impact investor. I invest in companies focused on climate change and renewable energy. And then the last category is what we call impact first, which are investors who actually are not that concerned about their investment. They're really thinking more about their philanthropy in this case. So they're thinking more about their impact. They want to really solve problems. But they think that an investment is the right model, maybe because they're still looking for some return, or they just think that it's more effective at creating social change. So the last two things I just want to put up there are, if you think about consideration of environmental and social factors, as we move through the spectrum, on the left, classic, there's no consideration. Classic investors never cross their mind. On the far right, philanthropist, that's all they think about. And as you move through it, it becomes a more important part of one's analysis as an investor. Conversely, if you think about financial returns, on the far right, philanthropists don't consider it at all. There is no financial return, zero. You give it away, 100%. Impact-first investors, generally speaking, almost always, they are not getting market returns. You cannot be an impact-first investor and also get a market return. Most of the categories, investors feel they can get market returns, and in fact, there's a growing body of academic research that shows that in some cases, it may be a good way to outperform the market, get better risk-adjusted returns, and that's perhaps something for our panelists to comment on. So let me wrap up by saying, this is impact investing, and the last comment I would make is, why does any of this matter? And the short answer is, we face great social and environmental challenges everywhere today, and there's simply not enough philanthropic capital to solve them. There's a fundamental shortage of funding. And there may not even be enough government capital. Today, government is in retreat globally in terms of solving social and environmental problems. And even when there is government capital, historically it's not always efficiently allocated. The markets tend to allocate more efficiently. But there is a lot of investment capital. Today especially, the world's awash in investment capital. So the idea of directing some of that investment capital towards solving our social and environmental problems, that's why this is important today and why we see a lot of interest in it. So let me stop there. Taking up nearly 10 minutes of our panel. And I'm going to ask our panelists to talk for a few minutes about their activities. And maybe Jocelyn will just go down through the panel in the order we've got here. And Jocelyn Songco is a principal at Soros Economic Development Fund. She's class of 2003. She's one of the early pioneers in this space. And I'd like to go through the detailed bios because we've got them in front of us here. But I'm going to ask Jocelyn to say a few words.
Great. Good morning. I don't have anything to add to that. So I'll talk about my work. I work with Soros Economic Development Fund, which is the impact investment team within a program within the Open Society Foundations, which is the philanthropic arm of George Soros. So we make investments into private companies, and this is distinct from his for-profit fund investments through Soros Fund Management. It's also distinct from the grant activity, broadly speaking, to the human rights space, but our strategy is aligned with that, which I'll get into. We've been investing since the late 1990s in Eastern Europe, principally in banks. And then when I joined about 10 years ago, we shifted our geographic focus to Sub-Saharan Africa. And then my particular focus since I started has been in the agri sector. We invest flexibly in terms of instruments, so it can be equity or debt. In the past, we've provided guarantees. The ticket size, by definition, in our strategy is anywhere from $500,000 to $20 million per direct or indirect investment. But as a practical matter, because we're managing the portfolio with a team of perhaps 15 people, I think the more likely range is between $2 to $10 million per investment. We're an impact-first investor. When we look to underwrite a transaction, we're looking for the social impact to be integral to the company's business, so not a CSR activity. And so simply put, this means that the operations of the company are interlinked with the social impact. And so as the company grows, as a general trajectory, the social impact will grow in the way of job creation, benefits to poor and low-income people who might be suppliers to that company or buyers from that company of affordable goods and services. We have a legacy portfolio, which encompasses exposure to banks, funds. Our largest exposure is in India. That fund is called Aspada, and they have a portfolio of maybe 17 companies or so. I'm responsible for overseeing that exposure, and it's a fascinating portfolio, and they have a great website, Aspada, in case you want to look at that. And we have a new strategy as of the last year or so, where we're looking to make our impact investments ever more aligned with the core mission of Open Society Foundations. So this idea of how can we make investments that also have a social justice component. And so maybe in the Q&A or so, I can get into that a little bit more. We do co-investments. We prefer that, but we don't have to co-invest. We're quite happy to lead. We're quite happy to be the anchor in a round. And we'll co-invest with other foundations, with the development finance institutions, with high net worth individuals who have a social impact interest, and then with local investors, local PE funds that might be in Africa, or local pension funds, local insurance companies. The idea is to be catalytic with our investment capital, so we don't want to crowd out commercial investors, and we may invest perhaps earlier than others, or when the company is at a riskier stage or the market is riskier, with the idea that these companies will evolve and then graduate to traditional commercial sources of capital. And then I guess just briefly, challenges in the space from my vantage point are at some level deal flow, quality of human capital, availability of human capital at the senior and the middle management levels in some of these principally small and medium enterprises. And then maybe and there's quite a lot of challenges, but maybe like the distinction between the target and the aspirational social impact and scalability potential of these for-profit companies, and then what you're actually seeing in the way of scaling, exiting these companies, growing these companies. So that's that.
Thank you for the introduction to your work. And Phoebe?
Sure. Is this on or?
Yeah.
Cool. So maybe I'm the anti-voice here today, but I approach the impact investing really from sort of two perspectives. One is having spent 15 years on the philanthropy side, where we were investing in nonprofits to achieve really tangible, measurable impact, and I would argue social return. And so I was engaged in really direct grant making, assessing nonprofits that were working on breaking the cycle of poverty. We also had a social return fund or venture fund where we were investing in small businesses that had a training component with the idea that there would be training and then direct employment and a revenue stream to support that. And so had the direct experience of some of the challenges with that model. Today, I am, I guess, the recipient of social impact investing. And I run an extremely large direct service organization with where we are leveraging public and private dollars to provide and drive measurable results for children living in poverty. I run one of New York City's oldest nonprofits called what was the Children's Aid Society and is now known as Children's Aid. And we support kids from cradle to college. We're 165 years old. I have 40 different locations, over 2,000 employees, and we serve 50,000 children in a city where 1 in 3 children live in poverty and 1 in 7 elementary school students experience homelessness, none of which fits perfectly into that model you saw up there. That said, we consider every dollar that is invested in us as an investment that pays dividends in the lives of children and a return when we as a society do not have to pay the cost, right? We're avoiding significant social costs, whether that is the cost of foster care or prison or homelessness. And I would argue that the constraints facing the human services sector are extremely significant. Government is in retreat. There is not enough philanthropy to solve this problem. And so all this investment capital is sitting there. And we really do fundamentally have to consider different models in order to be able to attract the resources to address these challenges. I think that said, one of the things that I hope we'll get to in our conversation is in all of this, one of the key pieces that I think is often missing is a fundamental understanding of the business model. And I mean that sort of across sector, whether it's government, the private sector, or nonprofits. We don't really understand the operational constraints, and that sometimes gets in the way of what our expectations are for impact. And so I think when we talk about, I was thinking about the challenges that Jocelyn just said, human capital is one of I only have people, right? We work with kids and families. You can't do that with technology. You really need to have people. And so supporting them, I have deferred maintenance on facilities like you would not believe, and no access to capital to address those things. So I'm going to be your contrary person, but I'm also really focused on how we drive these results for kids, because these are the folks that are going to be the staff and human capital of every business and every city's structure. So we have to figure this out together, and I trust you all have the answers for me.
Thank you, Phoebe. It's good to hear a broad perspective. John, in addition to his full-time role in business, he also is an adjunct professor here, and like myself, also teaches impact investing, but in the EMBA, Executive MBA program. So, John, a few minutes on your perspective.
Yeah, and I think I probably have to repeat the joke that I think I learned quite a lot from those slides that you showed earlier, and I think that shows the value of coming back to campus, because you get the chance to hear from people in the industry, and so I hope you all enjoy reading Weekend hugely. So in terms of, I thought I'd cover 3 things. One is route into impact investing. I think a lot of people want to hear about, how did you get into it? So just very, very quickly, I actually got into it accidentally. I ended up being a consulting CFO for an organization called Echoing Green, and that was actually at 2007 when Rockefeller Foundation and Anthony Buck-Levine were really financing that first outreach. And so we got financing in to do a structure called a recoverable grant, which is a way of providing money to social entrepreneurs that had some return potential if that organization was to become successful downstream, that would be applicable to both for-profit and non-profit enterprises. So that was the first foray into it, and I was very lucky as a result of that to have the opportunity to begin teaching at Columbia, which I've enjoyed thoroughly over the course since then. And the teaching, yes, the course is impact investing, but I think the term, as you're hearing already, covers such a wide, a huge swathe of different definitions, frankly, and approaches, etc. I focus on early stage. My entire career has pretty much been technology and early stage companies. So in the teaching side, look at business models and what does it mean to actually have a line of impact and a scalable source of revenue. And I think we'll come into some of these questions about, actually how often is that achievable. And then the financing of those early stage organizations. And I think another element I try to bring into the classroom is you talk about investing and that people naturally go very quickly towards for-profit business models and capturing equity and all that kind of good stuff. There's still a great deal, I think, of untapped potential in the non-profit sector where business is perfectly viable. There's nothing that stops you selling a product or service in a non-profit structure. There's nothing that stops you getting financing to support that. And as long as you manage it carefully, you retain your non-profit credentials, which is the charitable focus. So I think there's a lot there that could be leveraged in this talk about investing in impact. And then on the professional side, so I work as the head of what is effectively the East Coast for Tamer CFO. And we provide accounting and CFO services to predominantly venture-backed startups. On the West Coast, we've done work with Pinterest and Slack and Stripe. You'll see these names on the website. I'd like to think they had social impact. Slack helps you distract you from what you're meant to be doing. Stripe helps you get money from people for things you probably don't need. And Pinterest helps you share photographs, which is definitely useful. So those are the kind of companies we work with on a regular basis, and I think that's been, for me, has been extremely interesting because that's the sector that funds, a ton of the venture-backed businesses, which obviously is a small portion of the overall new businesses created per year in the United States and worldwide. But you get to see the comparables between social enterprises, the difficulties that they have in raising capital. I'm not saying that difficulties are not justifiable, but then the ways that they approach that usage of capital and the business models that are actually scalable. So that has been, for me, has been extremely beneficial in seeing the business focus of it. I think there's other things that we'll talk about, I'm sure, over the course of the questions.
Great. Thank you for those introductions. So one of the big challenges that comes up over and over again in impact investing is how do you measure impact? We can measure financial returns, we've been doing that for a while, but it's taken a long time to actually get good at that. My panelists, how important is it to measure impact? What are your thoughts on that in a sentence or two? It's a meaty question.
So we decided these are on? Yeah, okay. So what we've done in the past is we've agreed with the investee how we measure for a particular transaction. So that'll take the form of quantitative social metrics, for example, the number of jobs created, the number of low-income persons, the number of women, the number of acres harvested or cultivated, et cetera, and then we'll also have qualitative reports from the company that comments on just their various social activities or socially impactful activities. Because of our being in a new program, we have hired in some additional people and have a specific couple of colleagues focused on learning and engagement. And so we wanted to try to take a more systematic approach, but we're still in quite early stages. But the way of going about doing that is thinking of every step of the underwriting and deal process and where can you sort of take baseline snapshots of the current status, what does it look like a year out, 2 years out, et cetera. We've in the past looked at the existing platforms and systems for measurement and decided internally that it wasn't right for us because our portfolio is very diverse. We're not sort of core microfinance only investors. So because of such a diverse portfolio, we opted to do this on a more ad hoc basis, but we're still in the process of thinking about it today.
Yeah, and I would argue, no matter what stage you are on that chart, you should be thinking about the impact of what you're doing. I think I was actually taught in this building to think about especially any nonprofit, right, that's trying to achieve impact is that there's a black box. Things are going in there, right? Resources, human capital, dollars, time, and how do you measure the impact of that? And for us, that means that we are looking at measurable outcomes for kids, right? So if you're in our early childhood program, it's not looking just at the number of kids we're serving, but what's happening to them as a result of being in our program, right? We know that 91% of our kids are exceeding their developmental milestones at the end of being with us after a year when they came in at 42%. We know that they are ready for kindergarten and outperforming their peers on their third grade reading tests. That to me is what anyone making any investment at any of these stages in any organization should be thinking about. And we as an organization are holding ourselves accountable for outcomes in terms of education for young people, their social and emotional development, their health and wellness, and whether they have strong and stable families. So we look at our reunification rates in foster care. We're looking at obesity and asthma rates in our healthcare clinics. This is what galvanizes us. We also have to think about, are we doing that in a cost-effective manner that will be replicable and scalable? I mean, I would argue we're already at scale. But how do we translate those lessons? How do we change policy so that we're improving those outcomes?
Just add to that, I'm always apprehensive when this topic has to come in class about measuring impact because it's so incredibly difficult and it's so, it's variables depending upon opinion and definition and things can change as you go along. It's I try to illustrate that it's very hard to do without actually giving an answer as to how to do it. What I think when it comes to the small businesses, I think where we see businesses being successful, and I'll say successful in that context is scaling and becoming big in their own, as a company of its own right. And there, you have to see alignment between where that source of revenue is and what impact is getting created. And I think with these companies that we're seeing now coming through the fold, there's not so much focus on quantifying the impact exactly, because you've managed to, in design that business model or the way they've got developed, you've created this inextricable link between scaling and some form of impact, and you just know if you grow the business, there's going to be more impact that happens. Now that will change as the company grows. What impact is created early on is going to be different to what's created at a sizable company. But if you've got that linkage early on, I see that investors, supporters, financiers will grow that business knowing there is some consequential impact that is positive without focusing significantly on measuring it.
So I just wanted to add, just to emphasize the difficulty of measuring some of these things, both in terms of access to information, privacy concerns, a whole host of things. We tend to simplify, I think, sometimes what these outcomes can be. And that is, I think, in all of this work, the greatest challenge, right, is recognizing you could, in fact, measure everything. You might spend more time measuring than actually delivering any of the services. And so how you hold those two pieces operationally is really critical.
I would just add to that, we make the assumption that for-profit firms, we have financial measures, and we know all about that, and this sector is too fuzzy. But two key points to keep in mind. The financial measures, we've been working on that for 500 years. Double-entry bookkeeping was invented in the 1500s. And I don't know about you, but I still don't think financial statements are all that great. So that's the first one. And actually, sorry, not a personal attack, just the whole industry. And then a more subtle point is, sure, we have financial numbers and actually pretty sophisticated, but what does it actually tell us about what these companies are creating? I mean, Microsoft creates a product called Excel, and we can measure the financial return of that product for Microsoft and its investors. But Excel is there, I think it's there to create productivity. Right? We're more productive using it. I mean, I don't think you do it for fun, maybe our students do it for fun, but most people use Excel to increase the productivity. But how do you measure that? Like, is Microsoft increasing productivity? I'm not sure. So these impact measurements, it's not unique to this sector. It's just we need to get our hands around it if we're going to advance it. So speaking of advancing, I want to ask sort of one more general question for the panel and then open up. I talked about the history, the panelists sort of talked about the present and the work they're doing, very informative. Looking ahead to the future, what's going to change in the sector? Where do you see the advances coming? What are your predictions for the next 5 or 10 years? Who wants to take that up?
Everybody's looking at me. So it's a great question. I think in terms of trends, we are seeing the benefit corp. I think is one of the positive things that's happened on the structural side and the
John is what a benefit corp is.
So this is the initiative of B-Lab. There are two things. Carefully, they were named almost synonymous. One is the B Corp certification, which people apply for and get the certification, and they can label themselves as being environmentally and sustainably focused, and there's quite a comprehensive assessment they have to go through, and then they get a score, and if they're above it, they get the B Corp. And they have to renew that every so often. It's a membership. It's a little bit like a fair trade type marking. At the same time, they created what is a different type of incorporation legislation called the Benefit Corporation. Initially, they got that passed in states like Vermont and I think it's at some point in California and various others. Of course, the big one that everybody needed to get towards was Delaware, which they got that passed, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago. Something like 95% of companies created in the States are incorporated in Delaware because of income tax benefits. So now that it's there, you've got the very clear opportunity to create benefit corps. And the benefit corp has built into the governance structure a requirement for a part of the voting and shareholder governance to be focused on the stakeholders of the company, which are both the employees, essentially, everybody who's working within the company and contributing to it, and then its externalities as well. So it's really trying to embed that sense of governance, not just for shareholder benefit, which is people see that as maximizing profitability. It's not actually that, but there's now this benefit corp that helps embed that governance structure. So we're seeing a little bit more of that. I wouldn't say very, very much, but it's getting there. And I think that's a positive trend, and there's an intent to change the conversation on that.
Sure. So I think that you'll start to see more ability for the retail level investor to access investing in the impact space in the area where I'm focused. So you do have the areas that already exist, like SRI and et cetera, but what I'm seeing in terms of pitches coming to me are promoters that are presenting vehicles that are going to sort of capture finance from the retail level and make it available for things that haven't previously been considered, like working capital for agribusinesses in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa. And I think that's where it gets super exciting, because this business of direct lending to a single agribusiness, it's not going to get us that far in the long run. So we need a whole combination of interventions to solve the problems.
So I think that the place where I see maybe the most positive, or where I'm most hopeful, is we're blurring the lines, right, between nonprofits, government, for-profits, right? A B Corp has is a particularly, apparently I'm done, or you guys aren't moving enough in the room. And anyways, I think this blurring of the lines really creates greater opportunities for leverage. And the other thing that I'm particularly hopeful about is the perspective of these millennials, right? Who are not going to sit by and let us not address some of these problems. Our young people are the ones who are actually leading us around the gun violence. So if we can put our faith in them and give them the tools, I have much greater faith we can solve some of these problems together. But I do think we have to put ourselves in the other perspective, right? So understand the constraints of government, understand the constraints of the nonprofit, and understand the limitations of the for-profit environment. And so when we do that, I think we will come up with much more creative and long-lasting solutions.
Thanks to all of you. Just to echo Phoebe's comments, for those of you who are not a recent graduate here at the business school, the number of courses we have in social enterprise broadly and impact investing more narrowly has exploded. We have 23 courses now in social enterprise. 20 of those in the MBA, I think 3 are EMBA courses, and we literally cannot keep up with the demand from students.
Whereas we had 23 students.
Yeah, we actually had 1,000 students, or 1,000 seats that we fill, and most of those classes are oversubscribed, so we could actually fill more. Our biggest problem is we don't have enough seats, actually. So yeah, it's really, this is driven, this is not a top-down, this is the future, this is a bottom-up, this is where people want to go. So, questions?
Hi, I'm Tracy Gray. I'm a Berkeley Columbia IMBA graduate 08. I have a impact venture capital fund, and we invest in companies to increase their export capacity, but the mission is job creation in low and moderate income communities. We do that through investing in high-tech manufacturing, because they have to be in these communities. And we target women and minority-owned businesses. So I bring that up because my question is, you mentioned social justice. So I wanted to hear more about that, because in the marketplace right now, in philanthropy, women and girls of color get 1% of all philanthropic dollars. And then if you go, and women 7%, so it's not even much better for women. And then if you go on the investment side, there's no retail vehicles if you want to invest your values around racial or ethnic diversity. And then, as most people know, on the venture side, women get less than 3% of funding. If you're an African-American woman, it's less than 0.1%. Only 17 African-American women have raised over $1 million from venture ever in the country. And I advise one of them. So I'm wondering what we can do about that disparity that has actually gotten worse over time instead of gotten better. So you have no philanthropic dollars, you have no investment, so social impact is really the only place where you could change that. So that's my question. Free to solve.
Easy start.
Sure. Hi, Tracy. So I think the answer to the question also depends on the group that you're trying to work with, so I'll try to answer for at least a couple of groups. One is I'm focused on smallholder farmers, so these are small producers on maybe a hectare of land, couple of acres of land that are producing suboptimally. And so what we mean by social justice and what we're trying to do with our investment activity is looking at the benefits to that group that are not only economic. So for example, can we help those small farmers in ways that are fairly traditional, like increasing production, increasing access to markets. That's all great, that's economic, but then also can they capture value from a later stage of the value chain? So if we invest in an agribusiness, could, say, an organized farmer cooperative also own shares in that business? So there's more alignment with management, and they're able to not only be sort of exploited as producers, but also be managers, participate in governance. On the aspects that you mentioned with respect to women, it's a big problem. And so this is also an emerging area for us. Today, we're focused on smallholder farmers and refugees and migrants as our target groups. And we have this emerging area where we're starting to look at investment opportunities in the area of women's economic empowerment. So that would take the form potentially of investing in women fund managers or women-owned businesses or women-managed businesses, but we're still exploring what we can do in that area.
Just add to it that, and this is not like a pre-thought through or a proposed solution to it, but it's just almost just a fact of the way things work. We used to look at the New York venture scene and say, how was it so much smaller than what's going on in San Francisco? And the truth of the matter is there hadn't been any big unicorns or huge companies that had grown up to then look at and have that capital in New York to reinvest in New York entrepreneurs again. So where I'm going with that is I think what we need to see is successes. So those people that are getting finance right now, the African American, the women entrepreneurs, when we see those companies grow, there will be the consequent feedback of capital going into the entrepreneurs to which they relate and want to support. I know it's not a solution.
They can't grow if they don't have money to give.
I agree, it's not a solution, I'm just saying that's one piece of it. What I would say, though, that there are other entities out there like Asteo, who I'm sure you're aware of. There are a number of venture funds that are focusing on women-run businesses that I think are doing the right thing. I agree completely, we need a ton more of it. But there are some good, very solid companies and organizations out there doing that kind of work.
So I don't know that I have any solutions, but this is the crux of what we're trying to do in terms of develop human capital, right? And I think in all of our work, we have to take a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens in what we do and look at where the structural barriers are. And they are not just in the for-profits, they're not just in the financial markets. I am the first woman in 165 years to run this nonprofit that works on children's issues, where 80% of my employees are women, right? I mean, there are some really serious structural issues, and until we talk about them and have honest conversations about them, some of this continues. I mean, I look at some of the policy issues around the staff that are in my early childhood classrooms. They are predominantly single moms, women, and because of policies and pay parity issues, they get paid much less than if they were working for the city, which undermines the quality of my programs. I mean, it's just when I say we need to understand what are some of the structural realities of all of these entities, we have to get at some of that.
Just to add, this is a complex issue. Right. It's one last point now. I want to move on to take some other questions. I'm pessimistic about the venture end of this. This is very, very challenging for some complex structural reasons that have been highlighted. But what I'm seeing in this end of the spectrum, responsible investing and sustainable investing, which is primarily done by large funds. Believe it or not, KKR does this, Blackstone does this, pretty much TPG has the world's largest impact investing fund today. These are your traditional barbarians of the gate firms, right? And yet they are doing this for various reasons. But time after time when I go and speak, or I bring speakers from those firms into my classroom, they're women. Women are often the ones leading those initiatives. And my unscientific explanation for that, I have no data to back this up, is because in those firms which are male-dominated, women need to find a slightly different path. They need to be a little more creative, try slightly different things. And so I think that's one of the reasons they're actually in leadership roles in impact investing in these bigger firms. You see this over and over again. I have no data to back that up, but I think it's factual. Let's take some other questions. Yes.
Thank you. I just had a question from a different perspective. So I'm wondering, to what extent do you see corporate boards beginning to undertake these issues of ESG in terms of their own corporate governance practices? So interestingly enough, earlier this year, Larry Fink of BlackRock wrote his annual letter to CEOs to say, look, you guys have got to start incorporating ESG into your practices because investors are demanding it. So I'm just wondering to what extent do you see that actually happening? Is it a function of maybe, again, the composition and diversity of boards? So as they become more diverse and younger, so we don't see the all-white 70-year-old board, anymore, perhaps changing. How do you see that happening?
Yeah, so I actually think that's going to be an absolute mandate. And if you look, I don't know how many people know about the Edelman Trust Barometer, but if you look at, the trust in institutions has dropped off dramatically. And if we are going to rebuild that trust, and that's government, for-profits, nonprofits, right? We do not, as a society, have faith in those institutions anymore. And I would argue we're facing a time where we actually have to trust those institutions and have those institutions if we are going to be a successful society. I might be a little bit extreme, but I actually do feel like there are so many vulnerabilities that if we cannot bring back trust to those institutions, we have a very serious problem with our democracy. So I think you're going to have to address these because, again, that's what the millennials are demanding. That's what our population is demanding. And so I think it starts, for corporate boards, it starts to be critical to their economic success.
There are three...
Technology does not solve all things.
Yeah, especially not in yours, Hall. There are three big drivers why corporations are doing this. We've been talking from the investor side, and that whole spectrum is investors, but corporations do this for three reasons today. And not always from the board, it's more middle or higher management. They do it because investors want it. I mean, if your investor says, I want to look at you on an ESG basis, you got to provide that information. They do it because customers want it. I mean, how many stores have you gone to where there's something about, fair trade or sustainability? They don't just do that because it feels good. They do it because it increases their sales. And the third reason, I think the most important reason, is they do it because their employees want it. They want to hire the best Columbia Business School graduates. They got to say something about this because all things being equal, those graduates are going to go to the firm that appears stronger on those metrics. So there are three fundamental economic drivers that is pushing corporations in this direction. I'm not sure the boards are leading it, though. With some exceptions, because to your point, 7-year-old white boards may not be so aware of these factors.
I'm Antoine, was class of 93. I was at a conference last year in London on impact investing and fund investing. One of the things which was very interesting in the conference is like some speakers were speaking about how it's very difficult to create industry-wide metrics. And again, we look at the different aspects of investing, but how can we create something which is going to be like measurable and which is going to have like kind of a standard across?
That's the sort of deep question earlier about impact. Can we measure it? Should we measure it? And how? What are your thoughts about cross sort of, should there be a measure of impact like financials that applies to everybody or not? I have an opinion on that, but what's our panelists?
I think it would be great to see. I think unless you can normalize it down to a single dimension that then can be communicated very clearly, I think it's going to be problematic, and it has proven problematic. I think a lot of the initiatives that have started up have been good frameworks and things to think about, but I think it's a worthy goal. I struggle to see the viability of it, I suppose, is my summary.
So what I referenced earlier, but not named, is IRIS, is the industry standard for attempting this, and this is the platform, among others, that we consider, or the sort of methodology and framework that we considered as an investment team about whether we would use that or not, and we ultimately decided no because our portfolio was too diverse. If you take the flip side and you look at sort of the work that I do, what we as investors into private companies try to do when we have co-investors is at a minimum try to align our reporting requirements so that we're not placing that much more burden on a company that has 5 investors and 5 different sets of reporting requirements, which is very demanding on managers that can barely even just keep the door open.
So I would just add, as a philanthropist, we used to benchmark every organization against each other. So all our job training organizations were benchmarked. One of the challenges, I think, is sort of what's happening in the black box, right? Are you working with, folks with a third grade reading level and they need an intense long-term intervention, and that's going to cost you more and maybe get not as strong outcomes, versus I'm working with high school graduates or college graduates and they're running right through a program, and it's a sort of high touch or low touch, low investment outcome. And so I think that's some of the challenges with any standard, right, is that you lose the nuance, at least from the perspective of impact, on what is reasonable, right? So I'm not going to take a charter school that's working with 90% low-income students and compare their outcomes to the class at Brearley, right? I want the same results, but I have to look at what the structure is a little bit more carefully.
And I'm very skeptical of impact measurements that cut across industries. If we look at the nonprofit sector, there have been many attempts before impact investing to measure and evaluate so you would know which are the best ones. So you may be familiar with Charity Navigator, which does that here in the U.S. And I suppose that simplifies things, which is nice, but I'm not sure that measurement is all that useful. Their measure, and in fact, I think it can backfire. It can
100%.
100%, right? And I won't get into details of why that is. So I'm very skeptical if that actually is the way we should go here.
Harry Higgins, class of 78, classmate of Suzanne. I've spent a lot of time recently on Rotary International Global Investing, and they give away billions of dollars. The Gates Foundation gives away billions of dollars. I mean, polio is basically eradicated worldwide. Soros gives away billions of dollars. My question, these are major influencers in impact investing. To what extent is there collaboration among these big players?
There's a lot of efforts in collaboration and there's a lot of co-investing, but I think what you also see is that institutions and donors have their own particular interests, so that hampers sort of real effective coordination and direction of the funding.
As a recovering philanthropist, having been in some of those conversations and watched how some of that work came together, I think one of the challenges is that these big foundations and some smaller ones are very fickle, right? Move on to the next really exciting thing, and a lot of money gets plugged in, and we're not very patient. We expect it to happen all in 5 years, and then it's, oh, well, we're on to the next new trend because it gets attention. And so, I mean, I think you have to be a little skeptical. There are incredible opportunities, though, to come together. I mean, as Jocelyn was talking about reporting requirements, I mean, I can't tell you how, I mean, I have hundreds of different public funding sources that each one gets audited, each one has its own requirements. Meanwhile, I'm still doing a federal audit, I mean, it's just, if we could figure out some of that collaboration and simplify, that would be great.
I think we have about 5 more minutes, about a few more questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, we've been talking about donations and billions of Soros and the Gates Foundation. Let's say you want to make an investment that's socially conscious, and you're talking about $50,000 investment in $100,000. You talk about organizations like International Rescue Committee or some of these very large organizations. How do you go about ensuring that smaller investment can really, I mean, I've heard the term high impact philanthropy as an example. How if you were to say you had $50,000 to invest, what would be your recommendation approach and how best to deploy that to ensure that it's meeting whatever criteria you set up as an investor or an
Bruce might know for the industry generally. I can't really comment except to say that we see that activity sort of in sub-Saharan Africa in the form of angels. But then it depends on whether you want to be passive or active and whether you're putting that all in one lump or if you're sort of dabbling it, putting it in dribbles in different places.
I mean, I have endless ideas, so that was a dangerous question to say.
I like danger.
All right, so we can have a longer conversation about this, but I do think that this is, right, again, it depends on your level of engagement. Like, is there a particular issue that you want to make a difference in? And then I would suggest engaging with a nonprofit that's working on that, understanding how they operate, where the opportunities are for private dollar leverage, and what to expect from that, and come see it, right? Really, I mean, to me, the most, my best days are when I am showing someone our work and they start to see the challenges that our kids and our families are facing, and think creatively about how they make a difference in that, right? So, you know, the $50,000 investment is huge. It's huge when most funding is constrained, and it can be the key lever to make, you know, a $3 million contract from a government source work profoundly better. So I would encourage you to think about it that way, and I'm happy to give you some specifics.
I don't only have one thing, and that is it's a plug for the Columbia Startup Lab, and I think the Social Enterprise program and the ventures that are coming through that. There's a phenomenal amount of entrepreneurial capability at Columbia, and it's just growing every day. And so 50,000 would mean a ton to those entrepreneurs. So that's something to think about as well.
I would just add, for those investors who don't have $50,000 in an hour to work on this each year, there's dozens of ETFs now that are focused on ESG factors or specific themes like climate change. There are hundreds of mutual funds focused in this area. As you move down the spectrum, there's more hands-on type engagement. Of course, there are many, many great organizations. So it's really, I do come back to sort of where the investor wants to be on here. Of course, like any investor, the one who has 50 million has the ability to do more than the one who has 50,000. But today there's really an enormous number of funds and structures out there to do this. Lots of questions.
How much do you use the data of some of the outcomes of the programs you're funding to really try and push that on some of the, I mean, government tends to fund a lot of reactive and progressive kind of measures rather than, you know, it could be done more efficiently if you focused $4 in 0 to 5, for example. I mean, are you all having those conversations, and how successful?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have an entire policy and advocacy team, in part because, again, we're at scale, but the fact is, right, 1 in 3 kids are living in poverty in New York City. I couldn't possibly serve them all, and I have lots of partners of lots of other nonprofits to do this, so we have to actually change the policy. And so we're taking our direct experience and then advocating to the state, the feds, and the city about how to change practice. One of the places where we've been really successful with a minor amount of money is around children who have been in the foster care system. I mean, the numbers are absolutely pathetic as to how many kids who have had any experience in foster care make it into college, right? And you're talking about the kids who need their college education the most. They are going to be most of them are going to be on their own. And there's very limited dollars for a kid to get into college. So we actually advocated to the state that they needed to put additional resources aside for those things that are not covered, right? For books, for transportation, for when campuses close. If you're a kid in foster care, you have no place to go when campus closes. So here we have the kids who have made it the farthest, and they're being undermined by these tiny little things. And so we actually now have, sadly, only $6 million in the state budget, but it is a huge impact for those kids, and it's changing, right? It's changing the results and the long-term outcomes for those kids.
How has your investment strategy in the Startup Lab changed? What percentage of those ventures are social enterprises?
That's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. You'd be better placed to.
I don't have the answer to that, but anecdotally I can tell you. So there's a startup lab which has been doing funding for a while. As of 2.5 years ago, we have a fund within the business school called Tamer Social Venture Fund, and we fund 8 ventures a year, $25,000 grants to each one. And we actually have a course where the students do the due diligence on the applicants to the fund. So each round, we do 2 rounds a year. Each round, we're getting about 100 social ventures applying. And every single one of those ventures is started or run by Columbia University student, alumnus, or staff, faculty. So just within the Columbia community, which is a big community globally across the whole university, we're getting about 200 social ventures a year applying for funding. Big number.
I just had, I think the Columbia Startup Conference, which happened 2 weeks ago. I think there's 5 tracks, and one of them, there's 5 award tracks, so they compete for a prize in the conference, and one of those, I think, was social enterprise. So it features, and maybe it's a 20 to 25% level, roughly.
Yeah, the 15.
Okay, thank you. Rachel.
Rachel Rockford, class of 98. Phoebe, in your opening remarks, you talked about operating constraints and funders or constituents not wanting to talk about them. How do you bring operating constraints into the conversation about turning on funders?
I mean, I guess to some extent I would say this is the value of having had a Columbia Business School education and being in the nonprofit world. And I think sometimes in the nonprofit space we demonize, right, the business, and I am often demonized occasionally, a lot recently, but for bringing a business mindset. I have always thought you had good management tools, and it didn't matter what the sector was. But I'll give you, I was highlighting this a little bit earlier. So part of our business, right, is I am a service provider. I have a contract with the city to provide services that the city has deemed important, right? Those contracts are long-term. They're so 8 to 12 years. They have absolutely no adjustment in their dollar value. So I have to somehow figure out how to pay my employees more when they need raises. I can't cover the extraordinary health care costs, right, which have done nothing but go up. So the result is I don't do other things that the typical business would do. Plus, Charity Navigator is very helpful and criticizes me for my overhead rate. Even though my overhead rate is actually payroll, right? My outcomes measurement. I mean, it is this mind-boggling structure that no sane business person would engage in, right? So the result is over time, I don't make the investments in my facilities because I'm trying to maintain my staff. And now I got staff working in spaces they shouldn't, and I'm not making the investments in technology, so they don't have the tools that they need to make their lives better. So it becomes this very vicious cycle, but highlighting these things while focused on our outcomes is how you talk about it. And I think, right, engaging people in the work, and that's why I'm optimistic about where we're headed, because I think people, there was historically, I gave some to charity, but I just felt good about it. I wasn't thinking about how that work got done, what the impact was. And so I find that the engagement of people when they want to really wrestle with what are we facing, they're completely energized by what we can do. So that's how we're approaching it.
I think we are at time. Just to add to Phoebe's comment, when I've spoken to any Columbia Business School alumnus about impact investing, the idea of aligning good management practices, good business practices with social objectives, everyone gets it. This is pretty clear. The execution of it is really hard. Being a good investor is hard. Being good at social change is hard. Doing both together, not easy. But we've got some great panelists who work in this area, and please join me in thanking them. think it's Dean Hubbard's doing State of the School.
Yep, there's 11:30 and 3:01.
So I can tell you, school's doing great. So, if you want to just enjoy the sunshine and enjoy Dean Hubbard's talk. Thank you all.